Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Hollow Wolf Podcasts. It's been a while since we've done our previous podcasts. Corona and everything. Busy life is what it is. Nevertheless, I'm here, Hollow, joined by Wolf.
Yeah, and to be honest, this pandemic and everything, and with the lockdowns around the globe, like it has kept us really busy because we weren't able to seem to find any ways to actually do another podcast because everything the way we are actually like just stuck and cornered because of this entire bullshit. So yeah, we finally actually took out the time to make a podcast, and today's podcast is going to be enlightened by some knowledge that Hollow would like to provide us. And what is the topic for today?
So the topic for today is the Fed and its Ponzi scheme. The Fed referring to the Central Bank of the United States. And believe me you, one way or another, everybody's life is affected by the decisions that this particular entity makes. So hence, we thought it's better if we elaborate on how they work. And believe me you, people often think that economics and all this is so complicated. It's not. It's pretty straightforward. All the jargon that they try to induce you with is just to confuse you, to distract you, to make you think that it's something that you can't understand. However, my recent research on this topic has enlightened me a lot in a sense of how this whole thing works.
I'm kind of actually amazed the way you said that, it's not too complicated and everything, because I've seen you work with numbers, and as an engineer, I'm just like, well, that's too many numbers to actually work with, and it seems pretty complicated, like how the Fed and the Federal Reserve is actually functioning. I am actually aware of the fact that, of course, they're trying to actually come up with this Ponzi scheme to actually take out and extract money as much as possible from the consumers.
Yeah.
But also they're doing it very smartly because they always make a law over it. And then try to make it's like legal crack. It's kind of like this. You cannot take like MDMA or LSD, right?
Yeah.
But at the same time, when you're working out and like doing bodybuilding, you're using the whey, the proteins and the supplements, but it's legal crack.
Yeah.
That's how they make it work. They just try to find their own means to make money and legalize whatever's there and whatever's up to their own convenience.
So here's the thing. Let's start from the very beginning, right? To get an understanding of the basics of how this economics work. You have your particular economy in which money is circulating, and obviously the money supply in this particular economy over periods of time is going to increase. Why? Because there are interests. If you're asking, let's say you go to a bank, you take a loan. We've done a particular podcast on economics prior to this one. I recommend you listen to that one as well if you want to get a complete understanding of economics and how it works. But to brush over the idea is that when you take a loan from a bank, they ask you for interest. The moment you ask for a loan, the commercial banks, investment banks go to the central bank, which is the Fed, and they ask them, okay, this is the amount of loan a particular businessman is asking for, so can you please provide us this money? Hence, the money is printed into the economy. Now, what I particularly want to talk about is something known as quantitative easing.
And what is that? Quantitative easing. I've heard it before, but I never got to understand the details.
People sometimes also refer to it as stimulus package.
Mm-hmm.
I'm pretty sure a lot of people have heard that as well. So, what is quantitative easing? It's that the Fed, okay, how do they run the economy, right? You got your interest rates. The Federal Reserve has its particular interest rate. If the economy is headed towards inflation, hyperinflation, the Fed will increase the interest rate, meaning that the money that you borrow from a bank is going to be more expensive because you have to pay back more on interest.
And is it like a bubble?
It's a bubble.
Okay.
So the Fed will increase the interest rate to stop the inflation from happening because people will stop borrowing money. Spending is going to get less. Velocity of money going around the economy is going to go down. Hence, this is going to stop hyperinflation. On the other hand, if you go towards something known as stagflation or deflation, actually stagflation is the worst case scenario, but deflation or recession, in other words, is when the economy is dropping, it's losing its capacity to grow. That's when the Fed will increase the interest rate, which is going to stimulate borrowing. People are going to be more more invested in borrowing that money because it's cheaper to borrow.
The demand is high.
Demand gets higher. Okay, so that's the way this is called conventional policy. Okay, this is the proper way of controlling the inflation in an economy. Now, right after 2008, believe me, everyone listening to this podcast right now, your life has never been the same after 2008. Believe me,
And how is so?
some might have found an opportunity in it, and many would have lost. How is so? In 2008, the US economy went into recession. What did they do? They decreased the interest rate so they can stimulate borrowing. But guess what? Still, nobody wants to borrow money. Nobody at that point wants to borrow any money because no one's confident. They're keeping money with themselves in their house or bank accounts, whatever it is, and they're not spending money because they're afraid of what might happen. This is called liquidity trap. When you decrease the interest rate to something known as zero lower bound, where it's like 0.1, 0.2 interest rate, that's nothing. But people are not borrowing money. This is known as liquidity trap, right? Now, this happened in 2008. The United States, or rather the Fed, said, okay, at that time it was Ben Bernanke, the chairman of Federal Reserve. And he came up with the idea of quantitative easing, where the Fed would just print money and stimulate the economy. How do they do that? They go to a bank. They're like, okay, you have all these bad loans. At that time it was mortgage-backed securities. Basically, it's a jargon for loans for banks, right? You take a loan for a house, that's mortgage. Now, the mortgages that were in 2008 were terrible. People will not pay back for those houses. So what did the Fed do? The Fed went to the bank. They're like, okay, I'm gonna buy one of your, say, mortgage-backed securities. They're a bundle of subprime loans, terrible loans. Fed goes like, okay, I'm gonna buy 20 billion.
20 billion.
Yeah, let's say 20 billion. I'm gonna get to the numbers, actual numbers of what they were. But let's say $20 billion worth of assets, basically, which are houses. And instead I'm gonna obviously liquidate you with cash.
But what's the deal with the houses that people, if they've actually bought houses with the mortgages, and they don't have the money to pay for it? So how is the bank, like the Federal Reserve, you're saying the Federal Reserve went to the bank, right?
Yes.
Okay, so how is the Federal Reserve confident of giving the houses that people are not confident to pay for as assets to the Federal Reserve?
Because if the Federal Reserve pays 20 billion for, I don't know, God knows, number of houses, which are assets in per se, people are not going to pay for that, which means the Federal Reserve owns these houses.
So they're going to evict people. Because
if there are people who can't pay for the houses, they say, if you can't, get the fuck out.
so what if a large amount of people are actually unable to pay for the house? They're gonna kick everyone out.
I mean,
From what I've heard, that happened actually.
I don't know to that micro level of what the institutes are going to, because there's so many different types of agents. Like I'm talking about a numerous amount of assets of houses and.
Also, it's like a hierarchy. It's like there are agencies that are underneath.
It could be buildings for what's it called, offices. It could be, these are a real estate mortgages, right? Regardless, the Federal Reserve buys all of these, and obviously, if it's buying, it's gonna give cash to the banks. Banks get liquidated with that cash. And then banks can now spend that money and give it as loans to people on very cheap rates, so that the people take the loans and then they stimulate the economy, right?
Hold on. So you're saying that the Federal Reserve provides the house as assets to the bank, and the bank resells those real estate in a cheaper price.
Quite the opposite. Real estate buys those houses. Who owns the houses now? Federal Reserve.
Federal Reserve.
Not the bank.
Okay.
The bank has what now? Cash.
Cash. Okay. Oh, okay. So the bank has the cash to pay to the Federal Reserve.
To pay to the people.
Okay.
So that, not pay, I mean give it out as loans.
Stimulus is that stimulus
This
package?
entire procedure is stimulus package. The Federal Reserve printed money out of nowhere to buy those assets. Right? So in 2008, the Federal Reserve bought $700 billion worth of mortgage-backed securities.
That's a lot of numbers.
Bro, 700 billion ain't a joke. And that was the very first stimulus package from United States. Now, further down the line, like that's when it all started, right? Now, there's something called as the balance sheet of the Federal Reserve. Federal Reserve now owns $700 billion worth of real estate.
Holy shit.
Right? Now, what the idea was that when the economy stabilizes, the banks will come back to the Federal Reserve and buy those assets.
Okay. Like they're dealing with a huge amount of a lot of money, like $700 billion.
Yeah.
So they have the authority and the balance sheet. They have everything in check.
Yep.
So they can pull out money anytime they want.
They induce money into the economy, buy those assets. When everything stabilizes, the banks come back to the Federal Reserve to buy those assets back in return. And Federal Reserve takes that money from the bank and just burns it in thin air. That's the idea.
Why? But okay, so you print all the money, and from what, okay, here's the thing. Here's, from my point of view, it's economy is for dummies. This is what I understand. So you're printing money, and the worth of your currency is based on how much gold you have.
Used to be.
Not
after 1971.
1971. The petrodollar.
Petrodollar came after that,
Okay.
yes, 75.
So after 1975, you're printing money out of thin air. It has, basically, in reality, it has no value, but you're creating value out of it based on the assets you own now.
Well, the worth of dollar, to be honest, is just confidence. Okay, it's just confidence. So it's fiat currency, man. Like it's paper money. It has no intrinsic value. It's just based off confidence. Now, the real estate that the Federal Reserve has bought is an actual asset. It has value. The paper does not, right? However, the confidence that people have that dollar will survive and all that is keeping dollar alive. Especially the fact that Saudi Arabia deals its oil only in dollars, which keeps a high demand for dollars around the world. because you need to exchange petrol in the currency of dollars. Hence, it's petrodollar currency.
So
Anyways.
dollar is supported and backed up not by gold but by gas.
Yeah, essentially. Okay.
Gas is gonna run out at a point very soon.
Yes, and they're gonna have issues. So,
How far are we looking?
huh?
How far are we talking that it's gonna collapse? Near
We'll
future.
get to that.
All right.
So, that was the first quantitative easing session that the Federal Reserve had.
All right.
Now, soon after that, they realized, okay, it's not working out. There are too many details that I can go into. The banks held that money to themselves when they liquidated, the Federal Reserve liquidated bank with the cash. The banks held that cash with them and did not give it out as loans, which created stagflation. Means the amount of currency, the amount of paper money is increasing in money supply, which means obviously its value is going to decrease, and there's no velocity of the currency around the country. So inflation is going to increase and no growth whatsoever, which means you're entering a stage of stagflation, which is a problem, big problem. Anyways, they resolved that later on after more stimulus packages. Okay, and about 2015. The Federal Reserve, these were about 4 quantitative sessions, quantitative easing sessions, and it ended up with $4.5 trillion in their assets, the balance sheet. Federal Reserve accumulated $4.5 trillion of assets by 2015, obviously by liquidating the market with cash and buying the assets in return. Soon after that, what happened? 2020.
The pandemic.
Pandemic hit. Now, if you see the balance sheet of Federal Reserve, you can just go to Google, type balance sheet Federal Reserve, enter that, look at the chart, and look at how the assets of Federal Reserve increase after 2020. It shoots up to, guess what? $7.5 trillion.
$7.5 trillion.
$7.5 trillion. Now, one would say, okay, Federal Reserve has accumulated all of this assets and liquidated the market with cash. What happens when the economy falls?
What happens?
Federal Reserve will own all of these assets. Country's gonna go down. And guess what? Cherry on top. Federal Reserve is a private institute.
That has always been my fucking problem, that it's privatized. Why is your country running on something that's privatized?
It has stocks in the market.
And you're not supposed to have that.
And guess what? Who has majority of the stocks?
Who?
Rothschilds, Rockefellers,
Of course.
Morgans.
The 1% of the 1%.
They own the stocks of Federal Reserve. So essentially all the assets that Federal Reserve has accumulated are owned by Rothschilds and Rockefellers. In my opinion, whatever is happening at the moment and the fall of economy and the way Federal Reserve is accumulating this cash accumulating the assets is very much planned. So that when the economy falls, the 1% of 1% will own everything that there is around United States, or majority of it.
So basically they're not losing money, they're just gonna be like, okay, the economy is not working, give us back our money, and they're not losing anything.
They're more like, you know what, our currency is about to fall, dollar, so let's do this. Give that money to the population, which essentially eventually is going to fall, and in return take those assets accumulate them, because when the currency falls, the assets is what's going to be worth, not the currency. And people are going to be the one who are going to face all the consequences of the fallen dollar.
It's an ideal punishment by like the government. Like you're just pulling the strings of a consequential like a scenario where, like, you know, it's not the people's fault that you're shit at actually managing money. You're printing money out of thin air. You're not able to actually manage it, but you're just gonna let the population suffer because it doesn't matter.
So I made a chart earlier the other day, and I realized there are 4 basic layers. Right? 4 basic layers how the economy is set. I'll start with D.
Okay.
A, B, C, D. 4 layers.
Why are you starting from D, the lowest?
Because I want to go from lower to higher. Meaning, D is your regular population.
Alright.
Okay. Your regular population is right here. Your tiny businesses are here in D. You know, trying their best to get food on the table.
Tiny business, you mean like retail stores and these things?
Retail
right?
stores,
Right.
not technically. There's some big retail stores out there, but those come up above in this layer in C, which brings me to C, which has your companies, corporates, conglomerates. They come around in the layer of the C, right? Letter C, and then you got letter B, which has your investment banks, commercial banks like Morgan Chase, JP Morgan, Goldman Sachs, you know, all these big shots, Wells Fargo. This is layer B.
Alright.
And then you got layer A, which is the Federal Reserve and the government of the United States. The money goes from A, circulates to B, then circulates to C, and then circulates down eventually to D.
So basically, it's a pyramid scheme on a huge level.
Yes.
It's a pyramid scheme.
Yes.
Wow.
And the value of currency. Okay, it's like this. Let's say there is a drug dealer. All right. This guy in black market is going to sell some substance. Okay. And then the guy after that, who gets it, sells it to another guy for a higher price.
Alright.
And the third guy, if he sells to another fourth guy, is going to sell for a higher price. So the value of that particular substance, or rather the price of that particular substance, as it goes lower and lower, it becomes more expensive.
What makes it expensive?
So here's the thing. Commercial banks or investment banks take the loan from Federal Reserve as zero lower bound at this point. Cheap loan, okay?
Free money.
It's free, but essentially it's free, yeah.
Because the interest rate is less.
Let's say it has 2% interest rate. Let's just say.
All right.
When the bank gets this money, do you think this bank is going to sell down to someone else for the same price? No, it's going to be something like 6% interest rate.
They need to make a profit,
right? So and then it goes lower and when it goes lower to that from banks to people, it becomes more expensive. You see? So you can see how the value of that currency, as it goes lower through these layers, becomes more expensive.
And I would like to add a point on that somewhere I've heard that there was this guy on YouTube. He's Pakistani American. He works for a bank, and he kind of opened a lot of things like how banks use these schemes to actually fool people into buying a lot of assets and their loans, that they charge you with hidden charges. And the most bullshit thing they do is account maintenance. If you, for example, deposit, let's say like $10,000 or any currency whatsoever in a particular bank, they're gonna charge you for maintenance. And the guy said that what maintenance is being done on the money you deposit in the bank is just there in the safe.
Yeah.
What are you doing?
Yeah.
Like, are you just gonna take the money out and polish it? No. Like, what is it for?
Bro, banks have their
ways.
They have their ways to. That's their job, right? And you know, it's interesting to say this, but the very first banks were created by Freemasons. How is that? You go down to, I'm sure you're aware of the Knights Templar.
Of course.
At that time, they're part of Crusades, right? People from all around Europe and all around the close globe area around the world would want to go for a pilgrimage to Jerusalem, right? Whether those be Christians or, at that time it was Christians for Knights Templar. So what they did is that, let's say someone from the far west of Europe, Italy or whatever, wants to go to Jerusalem. At that time they had gold as currency, right? It wasn't really safe for them to go travel all the way to Jerusalem carrying all this gold. So what these Knights Templar did is that they created an agency in different cities, that say, okay, you deposit your gold in our place, you take the slip. When you reach to Jerusalem or anywhere in between, like ATMs, anywhere around a path that they've created, a road that they've created towards Jerusalem, you can take the slip, show it to that agency of our branch, and they will give you that gold back.
And they'll cut some amount from it.
No. They won't cut the amount from that. They will give you the amount you deposited.
The exact amount.
The exact amount.
So what's the profit in that?
Now here's the thing. When so many people started depositing money in different cities of agencies, and then they're like, okay, we're gonna give some of this as loans to other people, in which they have interest rates.
Okay.
So this is something known as fractional reserve banking. When you pay money to a bank, or deposit rather money to a bank, 10% of that, or rather 90% of that, is held as deposit for themselves that they will give out as loans. 90% of that, and 10% is what people do transactions with. 10% is transactions of people taking out money or gold from their agency, and 90% of it is giving out as loans, through which when they give out loan, obviously they get interest rate. With interest rate they get profit in return. That was essentially the very first banking system that was created, and from that time up until now, the top 1% of Freemasons own the banking system.
Wow.
From that very moment up till now, the banking system is in their palms.
It also actually occurred when the Jews actually were free from the Holocaust during the siege of the Third Reich. They brought a lot of gold that they actually smuggled, and those were also deposited in these banks in a huge lump sum amount.
Yeah.
And the thing that was profitable was that, I don't know if it's true or not, but when the money that was deposited was actually that gave a boost and demand to these banks and agencies to be used, because they actually put the slogan that we're so much trusted that these people who actually were from a diaspora, the Jews, when they came back, so they actually gave a boost and confidence in the gold that, okay, these people are actually depositing that much amount to us.
Yeah.
So it's better to actually give it to us. Confidence, straight up. Like, there's a demand for this bank, there's a huge name for this, and we'll keep your money safe. And hence forward in years, hidden charges and everything came.
Yeah. It's insane how this whole system works, and
it's a shitty system.
I'll to end this podcast, I would give some recommendations, ladies and gentlemen, and that is, don't save your money as cash. It's losing value every day. Take that cash, buy something that has intrinsic value. That could be precious metals, that could be anything else, an asset, a house, whatever it is. Accumulate your cash and buy assets, and do not save money in bank accounts, because believe me, your money is losing its value and they're stealing it from you.
And hopefully, I think this is going to be a 2-part or 3-part because it's a kind of like a long, interesting topic, and I would like to hear more. And I think our viewers would like to hear more about this. Listeners, and I think in the future, next podcast, I would also like to discuss about like what is the effect of Bitcoin and cryptocurrency in this such.
That's another
case.
topic later we can definitely get into because everything's going to become digital now, and that's when the dollar will fall. But let's see. That's another topic for another day. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for listening to us. And hopefully you learned something new today from us.
And we'll see you next time.
Take care.